When I first visited Djurs Sommerland back in 2010, Thor's Hammer was my favorite coaster in the park. Today, they've gotten a lot more new coasters, bigger coasters, better coasters, but this coaster still means a lot to me because of my childhood and because it's an overall good family ride. Today, I'm gonna give you my review of Thor's Hammer at Djurs Sommerland, which is a great little wild mouse. It was their second ever coaster, only after their Wacky Worm, which they no longer have, so it is the oldest coaster in the park now. That also means it was the first non-kiddie coaster that they got. It has a reputation of being a medium-tier family ride, which is basically a sort of beefed up wild mouse, because that's exactly what it is. And the last time I rode it was back in 2021, last year. Without further ado, I think we should just skibbity-bada-boo, we're out of technical stuff, transition.
This is beyond you, Metal Man.
Thor's Hammer is a Gerstlauer Bobsled. To be exact, it's actually the 480-4 layout, which is an exact clone of the first ever Gerstlauer coaster, G'sengte Sau at Erlebnispark Tripsdrill. It has classic wild mouse cars with 4 riders over 2 rows, which usually kills capacity, but these bobsleds do it well. It opened back in 2002, so it is one of Denmark's older coasters by now, and it's 52.5 feet tall. It is 1,574.8 feet long, and it goes 37.3 miles an hour according to the park themselves. Obviously, it has 0 inversions. This is definitely a family ride and not an actual thrill coaster like I would say Wildemusen is, which is another bobsled. The ride is 53 seconds long, which is overall a good length for any coaster. But this also, of course, includes mid-courses because it has those classic wild mouse switchbacks, which definitely take some time, but they are well worth it.
Hi, I am very ugly.
Thor's Hammer is not the prettiest. It has a good color scheme, but it's faded and worn and kind of ugly by now. Although it still looks nice. I mean, I like the color scheme of this cyan turquoise color with the brown. I think it's good. It fits the theme as well, because after all, it is themed to the god of thunder. It's supposed to be thunder on wait, is it wood? It's brown, it's something. The helixes look cool, especially the ones over the water. It's beautiful and scenic right there. And of course, the bunny hill that goes out of the tower right here looks really cool. So overall, it's an alright looking coaster. It's not pretty, but it's also not nightmare inducing.
I am Thor!
After the chain lift hill, Thor's Hammer starts out with a curved drop, which gives a little bit of laterals and actually some really solid forces down at the bottom. This is very similar to the drop that you find on Henketten at Bonbonland, except that is just a little more powerful. But generally, this is already enough to tell that this is not a standard wild mouse, because no mock or Mauer wild mouse would have an element like this. After a slow and chill ascent from that drop, you go into the first mid-course, and then after that into the switchbacks. I want to mention that none of the mid-courses really do anything. They're just there for capacity, which is good. I don't actually remember if they really hit the train, but I do know that they basically just don't really slow it down, because you hit those switchbacks pretty hard. And that's the good thing about this coaster. Pretty much all of these switchbacks have just about the same amount of power, and it's really good. Take a standard wild mouse coaster and just beef the laterals up, and you get this. They're very, very good laterals. Not the best laterals I've ever experienced, but certainly up there. And they're sustained as well, which is super good. Then you hit the first helix with a quick lateral pop to the side and then some nice forces in there. After that, there's a slightly whippy transition to the right, which is a really fun part of the ride, honestly, and then it goes into the biggest helix, which actually has some solid forces. And when you experience those helixes so close together with a very short break in between, you actually create a small chance of getting a gray out. Not a full-on gray out where you can't see shit,
I'm legally blind.
but enough for one of your eyes to say I'm out. So the helixes definitely have some good force for a family coaster, and they also generally feel very fast. After the helixes, you have a mid-course and then a fast drop, which unfortunately doesn't really have any airtime. Then a snappy bunny hill into the tower, which unfortunately also doesn't really have any airtime. Then you have a larger snappy bunny hill, which is almost a camelback, I would say, which goes out of this tower, and this one does actually have some weaker floater airtime, which is very nice. It is pretty much the only airtime I would say there is on the ride though, because there's no airtime on the following ascent up into the next mid-course brake run either. Then you have a helix, which is pretty similar to the first one really, has a nice quick lateral pop and then some nice forces, and of course this one goes over the water and is downwards for extra speed. Another really good whip, even better than the first one, over the water into a fast but not too extreme helix. This one is slightly larger, so it's not as forceful, but it's very fast. It feels like it might be the fastest part of the ride, mostly because you're over the water. And that's pretty much the end of the ride. So it has pretty much everything a classic Gerstlauer Bobsled should have, it has the switchbacks, the helixes, and the bunny hills, and those are the 3 main elements of these rides. And I would say for a family coaster, and especially for a Wild Mouse, very good layout.
So weird.
Since it's a Wild Mouse, the pacing is going to be kind of fucked up. It has a quick start with the drop, then at the switchbacks, it's slower, then it gets fast in the helixes, then moderate with the bunny hills, and then fast again with the final helixes. It's a little all over the place, and the pacing is certainly messy. It's good for a Wild Mouse because it certainly feels faster than a standard Wild Mouse layout, but for a coaster in general, it's not that good. I would have liked the bunny hills to be faster, but with the switchbacks, it feels very nice. Of course, they could be faster, they're not as strong as a Wildebusen, and neither are the bunny hills, so pacing could have definitely been a little bit better, but it's understandable that, of course, as a Wild Mouse, it does have to go slower, and the pacing isn't necessarily that important.
Don't shake the baby.
Thor's Hammer isn't smooth. It has a rattle that actually adds to the ride. I would say it makes the ride a little bit better in some terms, because it's actually fun, but unfortunately for me, for some reason I really can't explain, it also can get me a bit sick. Usually I have motion sickness when it comes to certain flat rides that spin around a lot, like a Huss breakdance for example. I would rather eat glass than ride a Huss breakdance again. But for some reason the rattle on Thor's Hammer also got me a bit nauseous. It was a very tiny amount. It didn't really bother me, of course, but I want to mention it because it was weird. And it actually sort of had an effect on my judgment of the coaster afterwards as well. So if you're a guy who has a weird relationship with motion sickness like I do, just be aware of that beforehand so you don't ride it right after a spinning flat ride or right before one maybe, or right after eating for that matter. But I mean, it's a very minor thing. Again, the rattle itself isn't uncomfortable. It adds to the ride. I think it makes it a little more chaotic and a little more fun.
Whosoever holds this hammer, if he be worthy, shall possess the power of Thor.
Thor's Hammer has a nice entrance. It has a nice little gate, and then further down the queue line, you have a little bit of rocks and some mild theming, and you have a nice and funny scene when you go through the door into the station. It's like a party of some sort with the Vikings, and the figures look kind of not too well made, but it's really funny. In the station, there's a pretty nice atmosphere. There's a rumble and some lightning effects in general, which really add to the theme, and of course to kind of hyping you up for the ride itself. There's also this Thor statue hanging from the ceiling. That's a little weird, but it's very iconic, so I honestly love that part. Doing the ride itself, there isn't really any theming apart from a little bit of fencing, and then of course there's the tower that you go in and out of with the bunny hills, which I actually really like. It adds to the off-ride experience and the on-ride experience, so I can only give kudos to that. But overall, the ride doesn't have any extraordinary theming. It's overall very solid. There's a low quantity of it, but the quality is pretty decent, and I really enjoyed it, especially the thunder in the station, which is my favorite part of it.
Doth mother know you weareth her drapes?
Thor's Hammer is a fun family ride. It's a slight upgrade from a standard family coaster because it has stronger laterals and a minor gray out chance in those helixes at the start. It's certainly an upgrade from any standard Wild Mouse.
Loser! You're a loser! Are you feeling sorry for yourself? Well, you should be, because you are dirt!
And I think really any Gerstlauer Bobsled is. I really wish more parks would invest in the Gerstlauer Bobsleds rather than regular Wild Mouse coasters, because as good as they are, these have more variety and options for your park, and typically more fun factor. They could be large like Heisefahrt and Wild- und Freizeitpark Klotten, or they can be compact like G'sengte Sau at Wiener Prater. It's sort of like a family version of their Infinity Coaster because there is so much variety that you could probably do. I bet you could fit an elevator lift onto this, or maybe even something like a wave turn. Look at something like Tiki Waka at Wallaby, Belgium, which even has a little outer bank. This is certainly a very, very good little coaster, and as an overall rating, I think I would give this a 6 out of 10. Now that might seem low, but that's for a coaster in general. For a family coaster, it would certainly get more, but for a coaster in general, it's above average, which is where 6 out of 10 sits for me. It's a very good family coaster, and I think this is just very fitting. One final comment I have to make is simply because the name annoys me. Why did they call it Thor's Hammer? That hammer has a name, and that would be so much cooler. If they called it Mjolnir, or Mjolnir as the English word for it is, that would be so much cooler, I think. I wish it was called that instead. That's it for my Thor's Hammer review. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Have you ridden it, or do you want to ride it? Of course, if you've ridden G'sengte Sau or any other Gerstlauer Bobsled, I would love to hear your experience. Other than that, it's time for me to buzz off and drink my... I don't know, I'm drinking coffee right now.
Who wants coffee?
Bye!